So up till now, we mainly studied atmospheric pollution. In this video, we'll now understand about water pollution, which is another major form of pollution. As you are already aware, our Earth's surface has about 70% water, and all of this water has different uses, and this water can also get contaminated in many different ways. There are broadly two ways in which water can get contaminated. One is where we exactly know the point source from where contamination is happening. For example, discharge pipes or sewage pipes that enter water. The other is because water is connected with land in so many different ways, we cannot exactly control a particular point or a source from where contamination is happening. Let's say a field next to a river. A lot of agricultural waste could enter the river through that. Let's talk about acid rain, for example, and you cannot control from where rain is going to happen, or such several different ways through which water can get contaminated, which means that it is extremely difficult to control water pollution. Now, the contamination that happens in several different ways, and there's different types of wastes that enter water and have different effects, which we are now going to discuss in detail. The first type of wastes are called pathogens, which are typically bacteria that enter the water either through sewage drainage or through excreta that enters water. These bacteria typically create gastrointestinal diseases in humans if the water that they consume is not filtered. Second type of wastes are organic wastes that are typically biodegradable in nature, so they should not be very harmful, but when they enter the water, and biodegradable organic wastes are typically leaves, grass, or certain forms of trash. When they enter water, they start degrading in water. The only challenge is the bacteria that decomposes this degradable wastes requires oxygen to complete the process. Now, when this decomposition is happening inside water, there is already very little oxygen present inside water for fish to use. That oxygen gets consumed in decomposing this waste, which reduces the oxygen supply inside the water. This measure is called a BOD, which is simply the biochemical oxygen demand, which is a measure of the amount of oxygen required to decompose organic wastes. Typically, clean water still requires about 5 parts per million of oxygen to clean itself, whereas polluted water requires upwards of 17 parts per million. Interestingly, there's only about 10 parts per million of oxygen in pure water, which means that enough oxygen isn't present in water itself to decompose all of the biodegradable wastes. The next type of wastes that enter water are a lot of chemicals, either inorganic chemicals or organic chemicals. Inorganic chemicals are typically water soluble in nature, and metals such as cadmium, mercury, nickel, etc. once they mix into water, and if they cannot be distilled out easily, they eventually come into humans and cause kidney or liver related problems. The other type of chemicals that enter water are organic chemicals, such as different types of petrols or fuels. You might have heard of oil spills happening in the oceans or the seas. A lot of detergents that are used on a day-to-day basis, which eventually go into the water and do not get separated out, or fertilizers used in agriculture, which we will discuss a little more in detail later in this chapter as well, also lead to water pollution. So to summarize, water pollution is something we cannot easily contain or control because there are several different points or sources from which wastes can enter water. The wastes that are even degradable still affect the oxygen quantity in water, which eventually affects the marine ecosystem. To ensure that drinking water is safe for everyone, we have set certain regulations for the amounts of the different constituents that are allowed in water. One of the constituents that actually needs to be there in water is fluoride. Why? Because it typically improves the enamel of teeth. However, excess fluoride in water starts causing tooth decay as well. So the permissible amount is 1 parts per million, which if you think of it is very, very small. In case this value increases to about 2 parts per million, it starts becoming harmful. All the others are mainly elements that we need to control and ensure that as less as possible is present in water. Lead typically enters water through most of the pipes used for transportation of water, which is why it's very, very important to control the amount of lead entering water. Typically, the upper limit for lead is 50 parts per billion. Please know that this is B, where everything else is typically million. This is parts per billion, and 1 billion is 1000 million, which means that this value is extremely small. To compare this with sulfate, you can see that sulfate's permissible value is 500 parts per million, which means a lot more sulfate is allowed as compared to lead. However, excess sulfate also leads to laxative effects. Lastly, nitrate again has a permissible value of 50 parts per million. In case the nitrate value in water increases, it typically leads to a syndrome called the blue baby syndrome. There are several other metals which I've listed over here and are also in your textbooks that have an upper cap on the amount that they can be present in water.